My name is Michael, and I want to share with you a story. A story about love, passion, and betrayal. A story that changed my life forever. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a software engineer at a large IT company in Chicago. My wife, Sarah, teaches literature at the local high school. We got married 5 years ago and have been living in a cozy two-story house in the suburbs that Sarah inherited from her grandmother. Sarah's mother, Ellen, lives with us. She is 58 years old, a housewife, and an active community member. Ellen is an amazing woman, energetic, witty, and very attractive for her age. She and I have always gotten along great, and I treated her more like an older friend than a mother-in-law. Our life was flowing smoothly and predictably until one day Ellen decided to repair an antique floor clock that had been standing in the living room for many years. This clock was a family heirloom. It belonged to Ellen's great-grandfather, but as long as I can remember, it had never worked. "Michael, dear, you're our jack of all trades," Ellen said at dinner, smiling slyly. "Could you help me with this old junk? We can chat at the same time. We haven't spent much time together lately." I nearly choked on a piece of lasagna. Of course, I was into watchmaking and had even assembled a couple of mechanical watches, but those were simple wristwatches, not huge floor monsters. But I couldn't refuse Ellen, and the prospect of spending more time with her seemed tempting. "Of course, Ellen, I'd be happy to help," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. "We'll start tomorrow." Sarah nodded approvingly and gently squeezed my hand. "That's so sweet of you, honey. Mom will be very happy." If only I had known then where this seemingly innocent idea would lead. If only I could have foreseen how my life would change when I crossed the threshold of that room. But I was blind and didn't notice the obvious signs that fate was sending me. Or maybe I just didn't want to notice. The next day, Ellen and I enthusiastically got to work. I brought my toolbox from the garage, and we began to disassemble the clock mechanism, carefully setting aside each part. "Look at this beauty," Ellen said admiringly, holding a tiny gear up to the light. "So much work and skill put into each element. They don't make clocks like this anymore." I nodded, involuntarily admiring how the sunbeam played in her chestnut hair, gathered in a messy bun. Ellen looked amazingly young and fresh, and for a moment it seemed to me that time had turned back, and before me was a young girl, full of hopes and dreams. We spent the whole day tinkering with the clock, hardly talking. Only occasionally would Ellen make some remarks or comments, and I would answer monosyllabically, completely absorbed in the work. But even in this silence, I felt a strange closeness, as if Ellen and I understood each other without words. When we finished for the day and began to gather the tools, our hands accidentally touched. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible touch, but it was like an electric shock. I pulled my hand away and averted my eyes in embarrassment, hoping that Ellen hadn't noticed anything. The next few days passed in the same way. Ellen and I would meet every morning in the living room and work on the clock until evening, taking breaks only for coffee and lunch. The conversations grew more frequent, and I was surprised to discover that Ellen was a wonderful storyteller with a great sense of humor. "You know, when I was young, I dreamed of becoming an actress," she confessed once, staring thoughtfully out the window. "I even enrolled in a theater studio and acted in a few plays. But then I met Sarah's father, got married, and somehow got caught up in everything." "I never would have thought," I said, genuinely surprised. "You're very good at it. Maybe it's not too late to try?" Ellen laughed, and her laughter sounded unexpectedly bitter. "No, Michael, that's all in the past. Now I have more important things to do." I suddenly felt incredibly sorry for this woman who had so easily given up her dream for her family. I wanted to say something encouraging, to comfort her, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just covered her hand with mine and squeezed gently. Ellen smiled gratefully and closed her eyes for a moment. With each passing day, our conversations became more frank and personal. We talked about everything, about childhood, about first love, about disappointments and hopes. I felt that Ellen trusted me like no one else, and this trust was intoxicating and made my head spin. One day, when we were once again bent over the clock mechanism, our faces were so close that I could make out every freckle on Ellen's nose. Her green eyes looked at me with a strange expression, both frightened and alluring. I felt my mouth go dry, and my heart begin to pound wildly. "Ellen, I began, not knowing what I wanted to say, but she put her finger to my lips, silencing me. "Don't, Michael. We mustn't." Her voice was trembling, and I realized that she felt the same thing I did, the same confusion, the same attraction, the same excruciating struggle between duty and desire. We stood frozen, afraid to make an extra move, to disturb the fragile balance. And then Ellen pulled away and quickly left the room. I stood there, feeling like the biggest fool. What was I thinking? How could I even allow the thought of betraying Sarah, of destroying our family? I knew I had to stay away from Ellen before it was too late, but easier said than done. Now that I was aware of my feelings, I couldn't think about anything else. Ellen had bewitched me. I saw her in my dreams, and in my waking hours, I heard her voice in the rustle of leaves outside the window and in the sound of rain. My body longed for her touch, and my soul longed for her understanding and warmth. For several days, we carefully avoided each other, limiting ourselves to only the necessary minimum of communication. Work on the clock stalled, and I had already forgotten about any gears and springs. All my thoughts were occupied by Ellen, her eyes, her smile, her soft hands. And then happened what I had feared, and at the same time desired with all my being. Ellen and I were left alone in the living room. Sarah had gone to stay overnight with a friend. The air seemed to crackle with tension, and I felt that any moment I would be torn to pieces. I don't know which of us made the first move. It seemed to happen simultaneously. We stepped towards each other and merged into an embrace, like two magnets drawn to each other through space and time. Ellen's lips were soft and sweet. They smelled of mint and something elusive and spicy. I kissed her like a madman, unable to tear myself away, and she responded with no less fervor, burying her fingers in my hair. We fell onto the couch, tearing off each other's clothes. I covered every inch of her body with kisses, reveling in the velvety skin and salty taste of sweat. Our passion was wild, almost primal, devoid of any tenderness or romance. We enjoyed each other roughly and greedily, as if for the last time. Then we lay for a long time, coming to our senses. Ellen smoked, flicking ashes right onto the carpet, and I stared at the ceiling, feeling overwhelmed by a wave of shame and disgust with myself. What have I done? How could I so easily destroy my marriage, betray my beloved wife? I wanted to jump up, get dressed and run away, forget about everything that had happened. But I couldn't, because despite the pangs of conscience and the fear of exposure, I didn't regret what had happened. It was too strong, too bright, too real, as if I had been asleep all my life and only now woke up, seeing the world as it really is, frightening, alluring, full of unknown possibilities. From that day on, Ellen and I became lovers. We met in secret, taking every opportunity to be alone. We locked ourselves in the garage while Sarah was at work, secluded ourselves in the woods during family picnics, even managed to make love in the bedroom I shared with my wife while she was taking a shower. It was madness, and I was aware of it. Every time I kissed Ellen, touched her bare skin, I felt my moral principles crumble, my habitual worldview bursting at the seams. I understood that sooner or later our secret would be revealed and everything would go to hell. My reputation, my marriage, my orderly and predictable life. But I couldn't stop anymore. Every time I told myself it was the last time, I immediately forgot everything as soon as I saw Ellen, smelled her scent, heard her voice. She became my obsession, my painful addiction. I wanted her constantly, from morning to night, and I hated myself for this weakness. Sarah seemed to notice nothing. She was happy that her mother and I had become so close, and joked that soon we would be able to open a family clock repair business. I smiled and hugged my wife, but inside me it was as if a black hole was growing, sucking in the remnants of my conscience and decency. Once, when Sarah went to a teachers' conference in another city, Ellen and I spent 3 whole days together. It was sheer madness. We hardly got out of bed, ordering food, not answering calls, losing track of time. We made love like obsessed, as if trying to make up for all that we had missed over the years and years of secret meetings and stolen moments. During those days, I learned a lot of new things about Ellen. I learned that in her youth she had been a wild hippie and had even lived in a commune. I learned that her first marriage had broken up because of her husband's infidelity, and it had broken her heart. I learned that she had never truly loved Sarah's father, but had married him more out of a sense of duty and fear of loneliness. And I also learned that Ellen loved me. She didn't say it directly, but I saw it in her eyes, caught it in the intonations of her voice, felt it in her touch. For her, I wasn't just a lover, not just an amusement from boredom and routine. I was her other half, her kindred spirit, the one she had been waiting for all her life. And I loved her too. I loved her in a way I had never loved Sarah, in a way I had never loved anyone. This feeling frightened me to the core, and at the same time inspired me, made me feel almighty and immortal. With Ellen, I seemed to find the meaning of my existence. I became myself, brave, strong, capable of anything. But the fairy tale couldn't last forever. Sarah came back, and Ellen and I had to return to our usual way of life: home, work, family dinners, rare moments alone. It was torture, and every day I felt more and more acutely the hopelessness and humiliation of our situation. I began to think about leaving Sarah. After all, I had already betrayed her. Our marriage had long ago turned into a fiction. Wouldn't it be more honest to divorce than to continue this shameful farce? I imagined how Ellen and I would start a new life somewhere far away, just the two of us, free and happy. But I was afraid. Afraid to destroy the familiar world, to hurt Sarah, to lose the respect of friends and colleagues, afraid of the unknown and the responsibility that this step would inevitably entail. And I kept silent, bided my time, hoping for some miracle that would resolve everything by itself. And then happened what we had long awaited and feared. The antique clock was finally repaired. Ellen triumphantly placed it back in its former place in the living room, and for the first time in many years, it filled the house with melodious chimes and a steady ticking. Sarah was beside herself with joy. She hugged her mother, kissed me, and announced that we absolutely had to arrange a celebratory dinner in honor of this event. I smiled and nodded, but inside I was all clenched with fear and a bad premonition. My intuition told me that this was a turning point, that from now on everything would change irrevocably. At dinner, Sarah praised mine and Ellen's skills and talent, and I sat on pins and needles, unable to swallow a single bite. Ellen also seemed pensive and detached. She twirled her glass of wine in her hands and stared off into the distance. When Sarah briefly went into the kitchen, Ellen leaned over to me and said quietly but firmly, "We need to stop, Michael. This can't go on any longer. We have to tell Sarah everything." I nearly dropped my fork. Tell Sarah? Has she gone mad? It would destroy our family, break Sarah's heart. I couldn't do that. I just couldn't. But Ellen was adamant. "Michael, listen," she insisted, looking me straight in the eye. "I can't lie anymore. I can't pretend and live a double life. It's killing me. Sarah deserves the truth, no matter how bitter it may be, and we deserve a chance to be together for real." Her words sounded so convincing, so tempting. For a moment, I myself believed that it was possible. Complete honesty, freedom, true love without looking back and compromising. But then reality came crashing down on me like an icy wave, and I realized that I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to lose Sarah, to destroy what I had built for years. I wasn't ready for the shame, the condemnation, and the unknown. "Ellen, please, let's not rush," I pleaded, trying to sound as convincing as possible. "We need to think it all through. Sarah won't be able to handle such a blow. Maybe we should try to distance ourselves gradually first. I promise we'll think of something. We will." But from Ellen's face, I could see that she didn't believe me. Disappointment and pain froze in her eyes, and I realized that I had betrayed her just as I had Sarah. That with my cowardice and faint-heartedness, I had destroyed the only real thing in my life. "You're a weakling, Michael," Ellen said quietly, shaking her head. "And you always have been. You hide behind lies and persuasion. You're afraid to take responsibility for your actions." "Well, do as you wish. But I won't be a part of it anymore. I can't do this anymore." With those words, she got up and left the room, leaving me alone with my guilt and despair. Sarah found me pale and lost when she returned, but I brushed it off as fatigue and went to bed unable to pretend any longer. After that conversation, everything changed. Ellen became distant and cold. She avoided being alone with me and spoke only when necessary. To all my attempts to talk, to explain myself, she responded with icy silence and contemptuous looks. I suffered and was angry at the same time. I suffered from the impossibility of being with the woman I loved, touching her, saying tender words to her. I was angry at her for this silent reproach, for making me feel like the last scoundrel and coward. Sarah, of course, noticed the cooling in my relationship with Ellen. She wondered why we had suddenly stopped working on the clock and spending time together, tried to find out what was wrong. I fended her off with generalities and gradually got drawn into the usual routine. Weeks passed, then months. Gradually, the pain of losing Ellen dulled, becoming almost habitual. I convinced myself that I had known from the beginning that our relationship was doomed, that it was all for the best. After all, I had a stable job, a loving wife, an orderly and predictable life. What more could one dream of? But sometimes, at night, I would wake up in a cold sweat and remember what we had lost. Those moments of absolute unity of souls and bodies, that feeling of endless freedom and flight. It seemed to me that I could hear Ellen's quiet footsteps behind the wall and the beating of her heart in unison with mine. At such moments, I asked myself the same question. Had I made a mistake? Had I erred in my choice, allowing fear and faint-heartedness to prevail over love? Maybe we should have taken the risk, put everything on the line in order to find true happiness. But every morning brought me back to reality, to Sarah, with her clear, trusting eyes and warm smile, to our shared home where peace and care reigned, to the steady ticking of the antique clock, reminding me of the irreversibility of time and the inevitability of paying for every choice made. And I resigned myself. I resigned myself to the fact that I had made this choice a long time ago, tying my life to Sarah, taking on the responsibility of a husband and son-in-law. I resigned myself to the fact that I would never again be able to be with Ellen the way I wanted, but would keep the memory of our love deep in my heart. Ellen and I still live under the same roof, meet every day at breakfast and dinner, exchange meaningless remarks. But a wall has grown between us, cold and impenetrable. A wall of understatement, regret, missed opportunities. Sometimes it seems to me that Ellen looks at me with longing and silent reproach, as if asking, what if? What if we had dared then, stepped over fear and opened up to each other completely? But I look away, unable to bear this question. We will probably never know how our life could have turned out. Could I have made Ellen truly happy? Could we have built something genuine on the ruins of my marriage and her hopes? Or would our passion have burned us to ashes in the end, leaving only cinders and pain? I only know that I will keep our secret until the end of my days. This is all I have left, the memory of those days of absolute intoxicating happiness, of the woman who made me fall in love with her completely. And every time I hear the melodious chime of the antique clock, I remember her face and mentally say the words that I never dared to say out loud. I love you, Ellen, and I always will, no matter what happens, even if we can never be together again. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.